A man named Paul moves through deserted streets, urgently scavenging for anything useful. His search is abruptly interrupted when warning sirens erupt in the city. He escapes to a secluded house in the countryside, where he discovers two infant babies left completely alone. He carefully lifts them into his arms and assures them that they are safe now. 15 years later, the infants, now named Thomas and Joseph, have grown into teenage boys. They live under Paul's firm but protective guidance, following strict survival routines. As dusk approaches, Joseph hurriedly boards up the windows and calls their faithful dog, Rocco, inside. Later that night, while the boys play chess, Rocco suddenly begins clawing at the floor and whining in distress. Paul and Thomas barely have time to react before a thunderous pounding slams against the front door. After several agonizing minutes, the pounding finally stops, and the creatures retreat into the darkness. Furious, Thomas snaps at Joseph for not helping during the attack. Joseph calmly explains that he was observing the creature's behavior and noticed that the first strike lasted 10 seconds, the second 20 seconds, and the final attack was only a single hit. The following morning, they inspect the front door and find deep claw gouges carved into the wood. Paul knows the door won't survive another night, so he takes the boys out to gather materials for repairs. Thomas becomes irritated, reminding his father that he planned to visit Rose's family's farm that day. Paul insists that reinforcing the house is more important, and that protecting the family must always come first. Along the way, Thomas demands to be dropped off near the farm and tells Joseph to pick him up later on the return trip. It quickly becomes obvious that his real reason for being there is Charlotte, the farmer's daughter. They walk together across the land, and Charlotte shows him a tree she once tied herself to with a rope as a child so she wouldn't wander too far. When it's time for Thomas to leave, Charlotte hugs him tightly, clearly not wanting to let him go. As evening approaches, Paul returns home and immediately feels uneasy when he sees Rocco waiting outside alone with no sign of either boy. Elsewhere, Joseph finishes gathering supplies but struggles to start the car, failing repeatedly before finally getting it to run. Meanwhile, Thomas sprints across the fields to their meeting point but suddenly slips and falls into a deep crack in the ground. When Joseph arrives and sees no sign of his brother, he assumes Thomas has already left and drives home alone. After Joseph explains what happened, Paul orders him to lock the house down completely and heads out into the night to search for Thomas. Thomas slowly regains consciousness, his body bruised and aching from the fall. He uses his lighter to see his surroundings and sees a grotesque creature with an arm unnaturally stretching through a narrow gap in the rock. The creature lets out a piercing scream, loud enough for Paul and Rocco to hear nearby. Thomas then takes his knife and drives it into the creature's hand, forcing it to pull back into the opening. Another creature suddenly drops from above and clamps its claws around his face. Thomas fights desperately until Paul arrives just in time, tearing the creature off his son and killing it instantly. Knowing it's far too dangerous to travel through the forest at night, Paul decides they must stay inside the hole until morning. Soon, unsettling sounds echo through the tunnels below. As the creatures begin forcing their way upward through the ground, Paul tosses a flare into the opening. A violent explosion erupts, killing the creatures, but the blast leaves Paul severely wounded. Back at the house, Joseph hears strange noises around the house, but instead of panicking, he ties a rope to a chair, positions himself in front of the boarded door, and pretends to sleep. Eventually, a claw slips through a gap in the wood. Joseph quickly pulls the rope, triggering his trap. A cage crashes down, imprisoning the creature. At sunrise, Joseph's anxiety grows when Paul, Thomas, and Rocco still haven't returned. He takes the car and drives out to search. Meanwhile, Thomas digs through the packed earth and clears the tunnel entrance, pulling his badly injured father free. Rocco races off, chasing the sound of Joseph's engine and leading Joseph straight to them. The brothers then lift Paul into the car and rush him back home. Back at the house, while treating Paul's injuries, Thomas notices a hidden cage in the corner. He lifts the covering cloth, only to recoil in shock as the trapped creature violently thrashes inside. Joseph quickly throws the sheet back over it, warning that exposure to light appears to weaken them. Thomas remembers Charlotte mentioning that the creatures almost never come near her family's farm. As they're talking, the trapped creature breaks free and hides beneath the bed. When it suddenly lunges out, Joseph holds it down while Thomas brings an axe, severing its head. Desperate to understand what they're facing, Joseph drags the dead creature into his workshop. He cuts it open and examines it carefully, but finds nothing that explains what kind of being it truly is. At the same time, Thomas insists they move Paul to Charlotte's farm, where there's more room and access to real medicine. As expected, Charlotte's parents hesitate. They admit they don't have enough medical supplies and refuse to take in someone with such severe injuries. Charlotte protests fiercely, but they only agree to let Thomas stay, forcing Joseph to take Paul back home alone. While driving back, Joseph notices fresh piles of dirt rising across the fields, clear signs that the creatures are tunneling just beneath the property. When he reaches the house, he spots a dirt trail running along the outer wall, confirming his fear that the monsters are already underneath the property. After doing everything he can for Paul, Joseph heads to the workshop and starts gathering supplies for a new plan. As he crosses the living room, he trips over a rug. When he lifts it, he discovers a hole in the floor and realizes the creatures had already breached the house. Back at the farm, Thomas sneaks quietly into the kitchen and searches for medicine until Charlotte catches him in the act. Without hesitation, she secretly hands him what he needs. Thomas thanks her with a hug and promises to return soon. As Thomas rushes toward the gate, a farm worker suddenly confronts him at gunpoint, accusing him of theft. Thomas insists Charlotte gave him the medicine, but the man refuses to believe him. Other workers rush over, restrain Thomas, and drag him into the garage. One of them prepares to shoot him in the legs, but before the trigger is pulled, the ground beneath the man splits open and he plunges into darkness. A massive creature bursts from the hole and attacks the remaining workers, tearing into them violently. Inside the farmhouse, Charlotte's parents wake up as strange noises echo through the halls. Her father lights a candle and cautiously steps forward to investigate. Before he can react, a creature bursts into the room and attacks him. In the chaos, the candle drops to the floor, igniting a fire. When the noise finally stops, Charlotte steps out of her room and freezes at the sight of a long trail of blood smeared across the floor. She reaches the bathroom, where she sees the creature carrying her mother's lifeless body over her shoulder. Back in the garage, Thomas struggles desperately against the ropes tying him down. Just as a creature spots him and prepares to strike, Charlotte appears and knocks it aside. Seeing the farmhouse engulfed in flames, Charlotte tells Thomas her parents are dead. With nowhere else to go, they decide to flee to Thomas's house. At the house, Joseph pushes heavy furniture into the hole in the floor, blocking it as best he can. Suddenly, the barricade collapses, and Thomas and Charlotte burst through the door. Joseph immediately calls for their help and explains his plan. They rush to the garage and gather fuel cans, while Rocco barks anxiously, sensing the danger closing in. Together, they haul an old freezer into the house. Thomas and Charlotte seal the last remaining windows, while Joseph stacks furniture into a massive pile and soaks it in fuel. On top, he places every explosive they have and sets one of Paul's cigarettes smoldering as a fuse. The barricade over the floor hole begins shaking violently. At the same time, a creature slithers down the chimney into Paul's room. Another monster erupts from the hole in the floor, but as it passes through a doorway, Thomas drives his knife deep into its back. A third creature lunges at Charlotte, but she drops it instantly with a single gunshot. They regroup with Joseph and shove the freezer into position. Suddenly, a door bursts open, revealing Paul, bloodied but alive, having just killed the chimney creature with his bare hands. Without hesitation, he grabs Charlotte's gun and fires repeatedly into the floor, trying to hit the creatures tunneling below, but there are too many. With Rocco, the siblings and Charlotte sprint toward the freezer, but Paul slams the door shut behind him, choosing to stay behind to buy them time. The creatures quickly swarm Paul, and just as they close in, the smoldering cigarette ignites the fuel-soaked pile. A massive explosion rips through the house, flames consuming everything. The freezer is hurled across the ground, tumbling violently before skidding to a halt. When the smoke clears, Thomas, Joseph, Charlotte, and Rocco crawl out, gasping for air. They run back toward the ruins, desperately searching for Paul, but instead, another creature lunges from the wreckage. They flee to the car as the burning monster chases them. Charlotte fires repeatedly, but the bullets have no effect. When it gets dangerously close, she swings her pistol with all her strength, knocking it down long enough for them to escape. They drive for miles before finally stopping in open countryside. For the first time in their lives, they look up and see the stars glowing in the night sky, a sight they had never known, having always been forced indoors after dark. At dawn, they return to the remains of their home. Rather than rebuilding, they choose to move forward. They bury their loved ones, say their final goodbyes, and stand together in silence. They then climb into the car and drive away, determined to find new people, a safer place, and a future worth surviving for.